Observe the world of men and you will see a truth. Power is everything. Nations rise and fall not on the strength of their ideals, but on their capacity to project force, to build, to dominate. In your modern age, this power flows from a more tangible yet equally potent source: energy. It is the lifeblood of your economies, the unseen force that animates your factories, illuminates your cities, fuels the engines of your global ambitions. Without a cheap and plentiful supply of this energy, a nation is but a hollow shell, its people impoverished, its industries stagnant, and its voice in the world reduced to a mere whisper. True prosperity, the kind that forges empires and secures legacies, is built upon a bedrock of unwavering energy dominance. Look at the isolated nation of Iceland, a land of ice and fire that has bent the very earth to its will. By harnessing the geothermal and hydroelectric power seething beneath its surface, it has become an energy titan, its per capita electricity production among the highest in the world. This abundance allows it to specialize in industries that would cripple lesser nations: aluminum smelting, the ravenous data centers that power your digital world. Then there is the brute force of America and its so-called shale boom. Through relentless and aggressive extraction, it unlocked vast reserves of oil and gas, dramatically reducing its energy costs. The result was a surge of economic might, a staggering $74 billion infusion into the pockets of its consumers, and the creation of nearly 750,000 jobs. This is the raw, unadorned truth of your world. Control over energy translates directly into jobs for your people, wealth for your treasuries, and the strength to impose your will upon the global stage. It is a simple, brutal equation that the naive and the weak consistently fail to grasp, much to their own detriment. This relentless pursuit of energy is not merely a matter of economic convenience. It is a fundamental imperative for survival. A nation that cannot power its own infrastructure is a nation on its knees, dependent on the whims of others. The correlation between economic output and energy consumption is undeniable, a self-perpetuating cycle where more energy fuels more growth, which in turn demands even more energy. This is the engine of progress, the very mechanism by which societies claw their way from poverty to prominence. To deny this reality is to embrace weakness, to choose poverty over power, and to condemn one's people to a future of irrelevance and servitude. The path to power is fraught with peril, and the reliance on others for one's strength is the most foolish gambit of all. Witness the humiliation of Germany, a supposed industrial giant brought to its knees by its foolish reliance on Russian energy. When the flames of conflict ignited in Ukraine, Germany found itself shackled to an adversary, its economic fate held hostage. The subsequent severing of this energy lifeline was a devastating blow. Energy prices skyrocketed by 35%, crippling households with exorbitant costs and strangling businesses with unsustainable expenses. The nation's much-vaunted industrial machine sputtered, its trade balance plunged into a deficit for the first time in decades, and the confidence of its people was shattered. This is the price of strategic naivety, a stark reminder that true security cannot be outsourced. This desperate scramble for energy security reveals the inherent conflict in the goals nations set for themselves. While importing from a powerful, resource-rich neighbor might seem economically prudent in times of peace, it forges a chain of dependency that can be weaponized in an instant. The German predicament serves as a cautionary tale for the entire world, a testament to the fact that short-term economic gains are a fool's bargain when they come at the cost of long-term strategic autonomy. A nation must control its own destiny, and that begins with controlling the energy that fuels it. The ultimate expression of power is self-sufficiency. A nation that produces its own energy is a fortress, impervious to the supply shocks and political blackmail that plague its dependent neighbors. This is the pinnacle of national strength, a state of being where a country is master of its own house, unbeholden to any foreign power for its survival and prosperity. Anything less is a compromise, a declaration of inferiority in the unending contest for global dominance. As if the balancing act between abundance and security were not challenging enough, A third, more insidious demand has entered the fray, the call for green energy. Your nations have bound themselves with pledges and agreements, creating an impossible trinity of objectives. You seek energy that is simultaneously cheap, secure, and clean. Yet these three goals are often mutually exclusive, pulling in opposite directions like wild beasts tethered to the same cart. In the pursuit of all three, most nations have succeeded at achieving none, their policies mired in contradiction, and their progress an illusion. The hypocrisy of this endeavor is staggering. While leaders pay lip service to environmental purity, the world's appetite for fossil fuels has never been greater. Global consumption continues to climb to unprecedented heights, and even the filthiest of fuels, coal, is being burned in ever-increasing quantities. Renewables, for all the fanfare, remain a fraction of the global energy mix. You speak of a transition, but your actions reveal a deep-seated addiction to the very substances you claim to abhor. This is because when faced with a choice between a vague, distant environmental promise and the immediate, tangible needs for cheap and reliable power, the latter will always prevail. Consider Australia, a country that piously phases out coal from its own grid while simultaneously shipping it by the megaton to be burned in China. It scrubs its own ledger clean while ensuring the atmospheric poison remains the same, or perhaps even worsens, thanks to the fuel burned to transport it across the sea. Norway, another self-proclaimed leader, funds its generous social programs by exporting vast quantities of oil and gas, the emissions of which are conveniently absent from its national tally. Even China, the world's leader in solar and wind capacity, simultaneously burns over half the world's coal to feed its insatiable hunger for growth. This is the great paradox of your age. You have created a system where every nation has an incentive to cheat. Each country understands that its own sacrifices are meaningless if others continue to pollute. Why should one nation hamstring its economy with expensive green mandates while its rivals surge ahead powered by cheap and dirty fuel? The result is a stalemate, a global game of chicken where no one is willing to swerve. Let us for a moment cast aside the sentimental foolishness of polar bears and dying forests. Let us view this problem through the cold, pragmatic lens of an economist, a shinobi who understands that sentiment is a liability. What if we were to ignore the environmental pleas entirely, focus solely on the preservation of long-term economic prosperity, on the maximization of your precious GDP? The core of the problem lies in what your economists call negative externalities. It is a simple concept, yet one with devastating consequences. When a transaction occurs, the buying and selling of fossil fuels, for instance, the price reflects only the cost to the immediate parties. It fails to account for the poison that is spewed into the atmosphere, a cost that is borne by all of society, now and in the future. This is a fundamental market failure. Because the true cost of this pollution is not included in the price, fossil fuels appear far cheaper than they actually are, leading to their rampant overuse. You are, in essence, subsidizing your own destruction. This situation is a classic example of the tragedy of the commons. Imagine a shared resource, a common pasture, in this case the very atmosphere you all breathe. Each individual, acting in their own rational self-interest, seeks to maximize their gain from this resource. But as each person adds more of their own livestock to graze, the cumulative effect is the depletion and ultimate destruction of the pasture itself, leaving everyone worse off. This is precisely what your nations are doing. You are like a room full of smokers, each one believing their single cigarette is a small price to pay for a moment of productivity or pleasure. But as everyone lights up, the room fills with toxic fumes, and soon no one can breathe. Not even the non-smokers who made no contribution to the foul air. Your shared atmosphere is that smoke-filled room. Each nation, pursuing its own economic growth, burns fuel and releases emissions, believing its contribution to be negligible in the grand scheme. Yet the collective result is a poisoned world, a degraded global commons where everyone suffers the consequences. The market, which you worship as an all-powerful force, is blind to this reality. It cannot price the cost of a stable climate, the value of breathable air, the security of predictable weather patterns. This failure of vision is leading you down a path toward collective ruin. So what is the actual economic toll of living in this global hotbox you are so diligently creating? The costs are not abstract or distant. They are tangible, measurable, already manifesting across your world. The first and most obvious price is paid in the currency of destruction. A warming planet breeds more frequent and more violent weather events, hurricanes of unprecedented power, floods that swallow cities, heat waves that buckle infrastructure. These are the direct consequence of your atmospheric meddling. Recent estimates place the annual cost of climate-attributed disasters at $143 billion. In the United States, billion-dollar disaster events have been rising relentlessly since 2000. These events do not just destroy homes and businesses. They obliterate productive capital. They shatter the infrastructure that underpins your economy. The cost is not confined to those directly in the path of destruction. As risks mount, insurance premiums for property across entire countries begin to soar. You are all paying for increased instability, whether on a coastline or 1,000 miles inland. This is a tax levied by nature itself. Beyond storms, a slower economic rot is taking hold in your fields. More frequent droughts and heat waves are degrading agricultural productivity. Damaged crops, reduced yields, rising food prices that erode real incomes and drag down GDP. Human-induced warming has already slashed global agricultural productivity by 21%. You are sabotaging your ability to feed yourselves. Heat also takes a direct toll on human labor. In physically demanding sectors, construction, agriculture, rising temperatures reduce worker supply and productivity. One report estimates 1.2 billion workers could see capacity reduced by heat stress. That translates into lower output, reduced incomes, and greater economic strain. Rising heat leads to more cases of heat stroke, exhaustion, cardiovascular strain. This places an ever-increasing burden on healthcare systems and increases heat-related deaths. In any conflict, the powerful find ways to shield themselves while the weak bear the brunt of the suffering. So it is with this war you are waging against the planet. While the effects of a warming world will be felt globally, they will not be distributed evenly. The cruel irony is that the nations that will suffer the most are those that are already the hottest, the poorest, and the least responsible for creating the problem in the first place. Countries situated in the tropics near the equator, already struggling with poverty and food insecurity, are destined to face the most catastrophic consequences. Their fragile economies and vulnerable populations have no defense against the coming onslaught. This is not to say that no one benefits. In the interest of a complete and ruthless analysis, one must acknowledge that there will be isolated winners. The increased carbon in the atmosphere may act as a fertilizer for certain crops like wheat, boosting yields in some regions. More significantly, the vast cold territories of Russia and Canada will become more habitable and agriculturally productive as temperatures rise, partially offsetting the devastating losses elsewhere. New shipping routes may open in the melting Arctic, reducing travel times and fuel costs. But these are fleeting regional gains, scraps from a table where the main course is global disaster. They are the exceptions that prove the overwhelmingly negative rule. These isolated benefits are a dangerous illusion, a siren song luring you toward complacency. The net effect of global warming remains decisively, catastrophically negative. The gains for a few northern nations will be dwarfed by the immense losses suffered by the many. This profound inequity raises the terrifying specter of forced mass migration on a scale never before seen in human history. As living conditions in equatorial regions become unbearable, as crops fail, water sources dry up, and coastlines disappear, hundreds of millions of people will be forced to move. This will not be a peaceful or orderly process. It will be a desperate, chaotic exodus that will destabilize nations and trigger conflicts across the globe. The injustice of this situation is palpable. The wealthy nations of the world, which built their prosperity over centuries by burning fossil fuels without restraint, will be the most insulated from the consequences. Meanwhile, the poorer nations, which contributed next to nothing to the atmospheric poison, will be submerged by the tide of disaster. They are being handed a death sentence for a crime they did not commit. This is the ultimate expression of the world's inherent inequality, a dynamic where the powerful pollute and the powerless pay the price. It is a recipe not for a stable future, but for a world torn apart by resentment, desperation, and perpetual conflict. The time for abstract debate is over. We must now weigh the costs on a scale and make a decision based on cold, hard numbers. What is the price of mitigating this global warming, and how does it compare to the cost of allowing it to run its course? The figures, compiled by your own economists, paint a stark and unambiguous picture. According to one of the most widely cited studies, a business-as-usual scenario, one where you do nothing, will result in a global economy that is 23% smaller by the year 2100 than it would be in a world without climate change. This is a median estimate, not the worst-case scenario. It represents a permanent annual loss of nearly a quarter of the world's wealth. Other analyses suggest the damage could be even more profound. A newer study from your National Bureau of Economic Research projects that the economic cost of unchecked warming could reach a staggering 50% of global GDP by 2100. It is crucial to understand that these effects are not linear. The hotter the planet gets, the faster your economic output will decline, cascading failures across agriculture, infrastructure, human health. Whether the final figure is 23% or 50%, the message is the same. Inaction is a path to economic annihilation. It is a slow-motion act of global self-immolation, a sacrifice of future prosperity for the sake of present convenience. Now, contrast this catastrophic outcome with the cost of taking action. The most comprehensive analysis on this subject, the Stern Review, estimates the annual investment needed at approximately 2% of global GDP. This figure is broadly consistent with other major analyses from institutions like the IPCC and IMF, which place the required investment at around 2 to 3% of global GDP per year. This is the price of funding the transition to clean energy, developing new technologies, and building the infrastructure needed to adapt to the changes already locked in. The conclusion is inescapable, even for the most cold-hearted observer. When you place the costs side by side, the choice becomes brutally clear. On one hand, the path of inaction leads to a permanent loss of 23% or more of annual global wealth. On the other, mitigation requires an annual investment of 2 to 3% of that wealth. The investment in mitigating the worst of global warming is not a cost. It is an insurance policy against economic collapse. It is the single greatest investment opportunity in human history, maximizing long-run global prosperity. An overwhelming consensus of your top economists supports this view. To ignore it is not just environmentally irresponsible. It is economically insane. If the economic case for action is so clear, why are you failing so miserably? The answer lies in human weakness and the flawed structures of your global order. The costs of mitigation are front-loaded. You must pay them now, while the most catastrophic consequences of inaction will only fully materialize after many current leaders are long dead. This temporal disconnect makes the necessary investment politically unpalatable. This is a global problem requiring unprecedented global cooperation. Rising geopolitical tension, eroding trust, petty nationalism. The rich feel insulated, the poor feel entitled, and everyone waits for someone else to act first. To break this deadlock, make the transition to net zero economically viable for nations in the short term. The most obvious weapon is the mass deployment of renewable energies. The International Energy Agency says 90% of your electricity must come from renewables by 2050. Fortunately, these technologies are increasingly cost-competitive with fossil fuels. They can be cheap, secure, and clean. However, these weapons have a critical flaw: intermittency. The sun does not always shine. The wind does not always blow. This is why a controllable baseload power source remains essential, and nuclear energy presents itself as the most potent solution. If you are truly serious about achieving your net zero ambitions by 2050, then the incentives to abandon your addiction to fossil fuels must be made stronger, more immediate, and more painful. This requires decisive government intervention. The most favored tool among your economists is carbon pricing, a direct tax on carbon emissions that forces polluters to pay for the negative externalities they impose upon the world. This is not a punishment, but a correction of a glaring market failure. By placing a price on carbon, you send a powerful signal throughout the entire economy. A steadily rising carbon tax harnesses the invisible hand of the market you so revere, steering it away from destructive habits toward innovation, toward efficiency. In the end, there is no single elegant jutsu that will solve this crisis. As with all things in your world, the path forward is a series of difficult trade-offs and value judgments. The long, hard, and inconvenient truth is that you stand at a precipice. You can continue down the path of short-term self-interest, chasing fleeting economic gains while ignoring the ever-growing bill that will be paid by future generations. Or you can make the prudent, albeit difficult choice to invest in your own survival.